Picture two people standing in the same kitchen, having just done the exact same thing. They forgot to call their mother back for 3 days. The first person feels a sharp, specific discomfort. I should have called her. That was thoughtless of me. I'll call her right now and apologise. The feeling is uncomfortable, but it is aimed precisely at the action. It has an edge, a shape, a place to land. The second person feels something entirely different. Not I did something wrong, but I am something wrong. Of course I forgot. I always let people down. I am the kind of person who cannot even manage to call his own mother. The discomfort here has no edges. It does not point at the missed phone call. It points at the whole self standing in the kitchen, existing. Both people forgot to make the same phone call, but only one of them is drowning. This is the line almost nobody is taught to see. Guilt says, I did a bad thing. Shame says, I am a bad thing. And the difference between those two sentences is not a matter of vocabulary. It is the difference between a feeling you can act on and repair, and a feeling that quietly convinces you repair is not even possible, because the thing that needs fixing is you. Carl Jung wrote that what we resist not only persists, but grows in size in the dark. Shame is very good at staying in the dark. It rarely announces itself directly. It disguises itself as other things, as self-deprecating humour, as chronic apology, as the reflex to leave a room before anyone can leave you first. This is not a video about feeling bad after making a mistake. This is about the quieter, more corrosive experience underneath that. The sense carried by so many people without ever naming it, that their most basic self is somehow fundamentally flawed, unacceptable, or too much, and that the only sane response is to hide. Guilt and shame are not just different intensities of the same feeling. They are built by entirely different processes, and they enter a person's life at different moments and through different doors. Guilt tends to arrive through actions and consequences. A child touches something fragile, it breaks. A parent explains why that was wrong. The child feels bad about the action, and in a healthy version of this sequence, learns, repairs what can be repaired, and moves on. The self stays intact throughout. Only the behaviour is under review. Shame arrives through a different door entirely. Identity. It is installed not when a parent says what you did was wrong, but when a parent, even unintentionally, communicates something closer to what you are is wrong. Sigmund Freud's early work on the developing psyche pointed towards something crucial here, that a child's sense of self is assembled almost entirely from the reactions of the people around them, long before the child has any independent way to evaluate themselves. If the dominant reaction a child receives is disappointment, disgust, or withdrawal, the child does not conclude that a specific behaviour was the problem. They conclude that they, as a whole, are the problem. Donald Winnicott's work on the developing self adds another layer. He observed that children need what he called mirroring. A caregiver's face reflecting back warmth, delight, and acceptance of who the child fundamentally is. When that mirroring is inconsistent, cold, or conditional, the child does not simply feel occasionally criticised. They begin to build an internal sense that their authentic self, if fully seen, would not be acceptable. This is the seed of shame, and it is planted long before a child has the words to describe what is happening to them. Karen Horney observed something similar from a different angle. She wrote about the gap that forms in many people between what she called the real self and the idealized self, an image of who a person believes they must become in order to be acceptable. The wider that gap grows, the more shame accumulates in the space between them, because every glimpse of the real self feels like evidence of falling short of the person you are supposed to be. What makes shame so much harder to spot than guilt is precisely this. Guilt is about something you did, so it comes with a story you can examine. Shame is about something you supposedly are, so it rarely comes with a story at all. It just feels like a fact. Not I acted badly in that moment, but this is simply who I am and always have been. This is why so many people who carry deep shame cannot point to a single dramatic event that caused it. It was rarely one moment. It was hundreds of small ones. A sigh, a look, a comment made in passing, each one small enough to be forgotten individually, but each one adding another layer of sediment to the same growing belief. Consider how differently the same household can shape two siblings. One child is told after breaking a vase, "That was careless, be more careful next time." The other child, after the same accident, is met with a long, disappointed silence, followed by, "You always do this." The first sentence is about an action, bounded and specific. The second sentence is about a pattern of being, and worse, it uses the word always, a small word that quietly transforms one broken vase into a permanent character trait. Neither parent may have intended anything different by the two remarks, but one child grows up believing they occasionally make mistakes. The other grows up believing that mistakes are simply what they are made of. This is also why shame so often travels across generations without anyone consciously choosing to pass it on. A parent carrying old, unexamined shame about their own worth will frequently, without meaning to, react to their child's ordinary failures with the same disproportionate alarm they once absorbed themselves. Not because they want to wound the child, but because the child's small mistake has accidentally brushed against the parent's own unresolved wound. And the reaction that follows belongs as much to that old wound as it does to the vase on the floor. Here is what makes shame so much more dangerous than guilt. Psychologically speaking, guilt is compatible with connection, shame is not. When you feel guilty, the natural next move is toward other people. You want to explain, apologize, repair. Guilt keeps you facing the world because the thing under review is external. An action, a choice, a moment in time. But when you feel ashamed, the natural next move is away from other people. If the problem is not what you did, but what you are, then being seen at all becomes the danger. Shame does not ask you to fix something. It asks you to disappear, or at minimum, to hide the parts of yourself that might confirm the verdict. Bessel van der Kolk's research into how emotional injury lives in the body offers something important here. Shame is not simply a thought, it is a full body state. The collapsed posture, the dropped eyes, the urge to make yourself physically smaller. Van der Kolk observed that this posture is not incidental. It is an old, pre-verbal signal, the same one seen in animals communicating submission or surrender. When shame activates, the body does not wait for the mind's permission. It simply tries to vanish. This is why shame so often produces behavior that looks, from the outside, like the opposite of what you would expect. A person flooded with shame might lash out, deflect blame instantly, or overcompensate with aggressive confidence. Not because they feel proud, but because the raw experience of exposure is so unbearable that almost any other feeling, including anger, is preferable to sitting inside it for even a few seconds. Karen Horney's concept of moving away from people captures this precisely. Where guilt tends to move a person toward repair and connection, shame moves a person toward withdrawal, secrecy, and self-concealment. And this creates one of the cruelest mechanisms in the entire structure. The more ashamed you feel, the less likely you are to tell anyone, which means the belief driving the shame never gets tested against reality, corrected or challenged. It simply keeps compounding in private, in the exact place where it can grow the most unchecked. There is also a subtler trap hiding inside all of this. Nathaniel Branden argued that authentic self-esteem requires the ability to tolerate being fully seen, flaws included, without that visibility threatening your sense of worth. Shame makes this nearly impossible because it convinces a person that being fully seen is precisely the danger. So instead of building genuine self-esteem through honest exposure and acceptance, a person shaped by shame often builds an elaborate, exhausting system of image management, carefully curating which parts of themselves are ever allowed into the light. Notice how this plays out in something as ordinary as receiving a compliment. Someone praises your work, and a person operating from guilt-based self-regard might simply say thank you and feel a small, uncomplicated warmth. But a person operating from shame often cannot let the compliment land at all. Some internal reflex immediately produces a counter-argument. They don't know the real me. If they saw what I'm actually like, they wouldn't say that. This is only impressive because I got lucky. The compliment is not received as information about the work. It is treated as a dangerous overestimation that must be quietly corrected before anyone gets close enough to discover the supposed truth underneath. This is the mechanism at its most exhausting. Shame does not simply make you feel bad in isolated moments. It installs a kind of permanent internal auditor, one whose only job is to make sure the gap between how you appear and how you secretly believe you are never closes enough for anyone to notice. The cost of unresolved shame rarely shows up where you would expect it. It shows up sideways, in places that seem at first glance unrelated. The first cost is intimacy itself. If your basic belief is that your real self would be rejected if fully seen, then closeness with another person becomes a slow motion threat rather than a comfort. Every step toward real vulnerability activates the same old alarm. They are getting closer to seeing it, whatever it is. Many people shaped by shame become extremely skilled at closeness that never quite deepens. Warm, engaging, even charming, but always managing the exact distance at which the real self stays hidden. The second cost is ambition, in a strange and counterintuitive way. Where guilt tends to motivate correction and improvement, shame tends to produce paralysis or self-sabotage, because trying and failing publicly confirms the exact verdict shame has already whispered. It is often safer, psychologically, to not try at all than to try and have the failure witnessed, because an untried life can still be quietly imagined as full of potential, while a witnessed failure feels like proof of what you always suspected about yourself. The third cost is harder to name, and it tends to surface only very late, often in moments of unexpected stillness. It is the growing suspicion that you have spent years, sometimes decades, defending against a verdict that was never actually a fact, that the flaw you have been hiding since childhood may never have been an accurate description of you at all, only an old reaction absorbed from people who were, in their own way, dealing with burdens that had nothing to do with you. Blaise Pascal wrote about the particular kind of restlessness that comes from being unable to sit with yourself in silence. Shame adds a sharper edge to that restlessness. It is not simply discomfort with stillness. It is the fear of what stillness might reveal. That if you finally stop moving, stop performing, stop managing your image for even a moment, the thing underneath might turn out to be exactly as unacceptable as you always feared. The final quiet irony is this: the people around someone carrying deep shame rarely see what that person believes about themselves. They see the curated version, the managed distance, the deflecting humour. What is actually hidden, the raw, unedited self the person is so certain would be rejected, is very often no different from what everyone else is also quietly hiding. Shame convinces each person separately that they are uniquely flawed, while ensuring that no one ever finds out how many people around them are carrying the identical private verdict. There is a particular scene that plays out for almost everyone shaped this way, usually late at night or in the quiet minutes after a social gathering has ended. A memory surfaces uninvited, something said 3 years ago, or a laugh that might have sounded slightly wrong, or a pause before someone answered a question, and the whole body responds as if the event were happening right now, in real time, with the same heat rising in the chest. The rational mind knows the moment is long over. The shame does not appear to know this at all. It treats the past as a case that is perpetually still open, still awaiting a verdict that somehow never quite finishes being delivered. There is often a specific moment, later in life, when the difference between guilt and shame stops being theoretical and becomes impossible to ignore. It tends to happen after something goes wrong, a mistake at work, a conflict with someone close, a moment of failure that would, for most people, produce ordinary guilt and a straightforward apology. But for someone carrying old shame, the reaction is disproportionate. The mistake itself is small. The internal collapse that follows it is not. And somewhere in the middle of that disproportionate collapse, a strange, clarifying thought can surface. This reaction is bigger than what actually happened. That single observation is often the first crack in the entire structure. Because if the reaction is bigger than the event, then the reaction was never really about the event at all. It was about something older, something the current situation only happened to touch. Carl Jung wrote about the necessity of bringing unconscious material into conscious awareness, insisting that psychological material left unexamined does not disappear. It simply continues operating from the dark, shaping behaviour without ever being questioned. Shame is exactly this kind of unconscious material for so many people. It was formed too early to be remembered clearly, absorbed too gradually to be traced to a single source, and left for years or decades to quietly write the rules for what closeness, ambition and rest were allowed to look like. The moment someone finally asks, out loud or only to themselves, is this shame actually true, or is it just old? That is not a small question. It is the first time the verdict gets examined instead of simply obeyed. If any part of the difference between guilt and shame felt familiar as you were listening, you are far from alone in it. This channel exists to sit with exactly these kinds of quiet, unspoken psychological patterns, the ones absorbed so early and so gradually that they simply feel like facts about who you are. If that is the kind of exploration you are drawn to, consider staying. There is more of this ahead. There is no clean resolution to offer here, no simple technique to dissolve a belief that took decades to build. What Jung, Winnicott and Horney all seem to circle, in their different languages, is simply this. Guilt tells you something you did needs repair. Shame tells you that you need to disappear. Only one of those two sentences is ever actually true. Whether that distinction changes anything for you is not a question this video can answer. If any part of this reached something in you, say so in the comments. Not the story behind it, if you are not ready for that, but simply which of the two feelings you recognise more. And if you know someone who has spent years apologising for existing rather than for what they actually did, this might be the first time anyone has ever handed them the words to tell the difference.